What makes you say that mental health is more important for coaches than players?
Um, I don't know if it's more important for coaches than it is players. I think that I mean, I feel like players have I think it's harder. The mental game for the coaches is a lot harder than it is the mental game for the players. Players are more narrow focused on their performance and how they're doing, and they're supported by a full coaching staff, athletic trainers, mental performance support. They have everything. When a coach has to worry about how everybody else is thinking and feeling, and on top of their own with no support. And so I think it's coaches are kind of left on an island, and players are one more supported, but theirs is also, if a player is lacking self-confidence, um, it's they can still just focus on kind of their job. And a coach, if you're lacking self-confidence, you got to worry about your players also lacking self-confidence. So yeah.
So yeah, when you're a player, it's you only have to worry about yourself. When you are a head coach, you have to worry about not only your head self or your own, not only yourself, you have to worry about an entire roster. You have to worry about, depending on the level, boosters. You have to worry about the athletic department. You have to worry about your other coaches. And it's everybody has become your burden as
Yeah.
opposed to just yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, it's I've never met a player who had to think like, oh, I wonder where my coach is at right now, like mentally, and coaches lose sleep over, I wonder what my players are thinking right now. So it's your own battle, internal battles, as well as trying to get in front of your players.
Do you think that coaches are aware that they need help, or do you think it's one of those things where there's still that stigma from a coach's lens where they can't show that they're struggling or that they need help or that they need other systems in place?
Coaches know there's a problem, especially in the NCAA. They know that there's an issue as far as getting help. At the end of the day, coaches just want to win and impact lives. So if you can convince them that this is directly impacts winning and impacting people's lives, they would be all for it. I think the biggest thing with coaches is spending time on themselves. There's only so much time in the day, and asking a coach to work on themselves for an hour out of or 2 hours out of a month can be scary. Um, and so I think there is different stigmas around it, but more and more coaches are realizing that they impact everything, and starting to see it as a competitive advantage.
Have you seen that Matt Rule, the head coach of Nebraska, has a podcast now?
I have not.
So he literally just started, they just teased the trailer. They might have even released an episode already. I haven't gotten a chance to listen to it. Um, but he decided to create a podcast and start one and
Wow.
to talk about, I forget exactly the lens of what he's talking about, but I believe a lot of different topics. And it is unheard of in general athletics for the coach to have a podcast because of said distractions.
Yeah.
Now, putting you on the spot here a little bit, do you believe that that could be a therapeutic or a strategic way for a coach to spend their time away from sport?
I think it's important for that in particular coach to figure out what helps him be at his best. And if it's doing a podcast, then that's what it is. I think there's nothing wrong with getting like external processing and getting words out. I think probably also sharpens his craft, as well as, he's trying. I'm assuming he's putting out content to help other coaches or just around the sport. So it might be sharpening his axe at the same time. And might be his accountability, to continue to get better, kind of with that Kaizen commitment to a continual improvement mentality. So I don't know his overall, intent behind it. Me personally, I would have struggled to do it, but if it helps him, then I don't see a problem with it.
How do you know, or how do you find the things that work for you that allow you to perform at your best? Like, for example, you said if it enables him to be better, then absolutely do it. How do you determine or find things that inherently make you a better coach?
I think a lot of different things, trial and error. Um, you know, do different things, different prep. I think each person is very unique, and so the work that I do, we work with coaches to figure out what works best for them. Um, and so I think all problems are universal, but the solutions are unique. So I think trial and error and knowing yourself. I mean, you've been with yourself this whole time. And I also am a big believer in taking from the past and your past experiences and learning from them. And how were you when you were at your best? What were you focused on? What were you doing in those moments? Um, and yeah.
What are your pillars to begin to help coaches with these types of issues?
Yeah, I mean, I work with coaches across four different areas. So I help them master the areas outside of the X and O's that impact winning. So that's the inner game, which is the mindset, the imposter syndrome, the handling your emotions. So there's the inner game, and then next is the locker room, and that's just focusing on creating a healthy environment and a healthy locker room, and really creating a culture that leads itself. And then the next area is the CEO leadership, kind of just like your presence and how you show up on a daily basis and how you're delegating with staff, and empowering your assistants as well. And then the last area is game day, is just kind of how you're showing up, your behavior. Are you helping winning or are you hurting winning?
What do you think is the most important of those pillars?
Um, I don't know if there's one more important than another. I think the inner game probably is one that's the most important. Because if you don't have it together, yourself, your team will not have it together. Um, I think out of all those areas, that's where coaches lack the most is probably the inner game, and it affects play. That's why you see coaches storming off, or coaches super short tempered, or coaches completely burnt out, um, coaches who struggle to leave practice at practice, a bad game at a bad game. Um, and when a coach gives off that energy, it bleeds into a lot of different areas, and it affects a lot of different people. So I think the inner game, I guess, speaking it out loud might be most important, but you could have the perfect inner game and then be terrible with building relationships. Um, or you could be, not delegating anything with your staff and be really, not the best leader. So I think they all go hand in hand.
Inner game 101. Coach is trying to avoid burnout. They're trying to reduce that short fuse. They are trying to just get themselves in a mentally ready position to do their job. Where do you begin to start?
Figuring out what the problem is. What is it a roadblock? Is it a like a like a struggle with leadership thing? Is it self-doubt? Is it imposter syndrome? And then I think really is just defining who you want to become. I think that is the number one thing is to define who you want to be. We know what you don't want to be, but let's figure out what you do. And that's really hard for a lot of people. Just to ask them, well, where do you want to go? Um, we get the only thing we're super clear on in life is like significant others. Like we know how we want them to look. We know how we want them to make us feel. We know how we want them to be a certain height. We want them to be, but when it comes to everything else, we only know what we don't like. So really getting super crystal clear on who you want to become, what's getting in the way of that, and how to overcome it.
When you help people try and figure out who they want to become, what do you have them do to begin that process of figuring out the type of person they want to be?
I do everything through questions, so question-based leadership, and I believe all the answers are within people. Um, and so I just ask them, what if I could help you achieve anything in a year, what would it be? Um, and and then what would the result of that be? Like, what would you get from that? And it's usually calm, peace of mind, um, be more confident. So really just asking powerful questions.
I love to make people reflect and ask themselves questions as well.
Yeah,
Most people don't take the time to look inward to who they actually want to become or what
yeah,
that even looks like.
yeah,
Frequently in sports, we say, you aren't what you do, you aren't your sport, right? But nobody actually takes the time to help coaches and athletes figure out, well, who are you then? If you're not your sport, who are you? It's easy to say, sports is something I do, it's not who I am. But if I don't know who I am, then sports are naturally going to fill that void. Whether you're a coach, player, whether you're athletic director, whether you're a CEO of a company, if you don't have a firm grasp of who you are, something will fill that void and determine your identity for you.
yeah,
And I have such a strong belief, and everyone that listens to my show knows this. I have such a strong belief around identity in that everything in every aspect of our life stems from who we are as people, how we respond to adversity, how we handle our emotions, how we show love, how we connect, how we perform is all rooted from who we are. And few people are out there actually helping people become or at least identify who they want to be.
yeah, yeah. It's a question that when you ask, people have no clue how to answer. And just to touch on what you said about identity and wrapping it up, a lot of people don't know, but leaving coaching is hard for so many people. I have a former college coaches group where we meet once a month, and we're all trying to find ourselves in the real world, quote unquote. And it is an identity thing. You see yourself in this, and people know you as a coach. And it's hard to get past that sometimes. And we're all at a point now where we're trying to reprogram ourselves and rebuild ourselves into who we want to become.
I know one thing that you had mentioned to me was you're currently in the process of reprogramming yourself and challenging your limiting beliefs. What does
Yeah.
that look like currently for you?
Being a solo entrepreneur is a lot different for me. I been in a locker room my whole life. I'm a locker room guy. I love team and camaraderie and brainstorming together. And now that I'm on my own, it's different. It's just me and my thoughts. And right now, the reprogramming is just that activity doesn't equal productivity. Um, I think slowing down is another thing. I when I was in coaching, I wanted nothing but nights and weekends, and I finally got nights and weekends, and I didn't know what the hell to do with it. And my habits were like, you need to be working, you need to be working, and that I kind of if I'm not working, I'm not being a good person, and so, and also I think the biggest thing I'm working on right now is just self-love and self-respect. Um, that's something that I didn't realize it, but I've always been kind of harsh on myself. Super understanding and can give other people perspective, but kind of struggle with myself as far as hard on myself or where I should be or, um, you know, different things like that. So kind of just replacing that with self-love. And that comes from journaling at night of who I want to be. It comes from meditation in the morning and honestly just awareness. You're aware of something and you start catching yourself, that just shows that you're getting closer. In basketball terms, if a player you show him over and over in film and you blow the whistle because he's not in help side and he immediately goes, I know it's me, I'm not in help side. That awareness is huge. And you that player is going to start to change. So my process is just to have intent to love myself and practice.
The transition out of coaching, as you described it, is very similar to the transition, out of being a player in terms of you're with a team, you're in the locker room, you are always doing stuff with the guys, right? A huge part of what's hard to move on from sports is that losing that locker room,
Yeah,
right? Because as much as you would like to get it outside, there's very few things in the world where you have in football world 120 guys who are all combining different religious beliefs, ethnic beliefs, you know, business beliefs, personal beliefs, whatever it is, to all get to like a championship.
yeah,
And you don't get that in the real world. The
yeah,
other piece of that is like that adrenaline rush from coaching of in playing on game day. You cannot simulate that. It is so hard. And
right.
then, like you said, the lonely part going from that to a solopreneur is is so incredibly hard to describe unless you've experienced both ends. You
Yeah,
go from being surrounded by 120 guys going through the same things to being by yourself, constantly questioning yourself, constantly trying to wonder if you're doing enough, wondering if, hey, is this the right decision to make? And having no one to really bounce it off of
yeah,
other than you to make that decision and live with it. Something you said that I think is really important is that awareness piece. And that is I would argue, the most important thing that I help athletes develop that I work with is awareness.
mm,
Awareness around what I need and when I need it. Awareness around why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling. Awareness around, hey, I probably actually need to drink some water because I haven't had water all day. And that's one of the things I've been working on, right? Is the awareness around the different moments of your life and then how that influences your behavior day to day to reflect again that type of person you want to become.
yeah. I
As
think
one last thing, because you went on you said a lot of goodness there. Tell me what you mean by self love.
man, um, I think we have a negative bias. We only remember the negative things throughout the day. And so just pulling yourself back and having perspective and counting your wins is self-love. Is when you feel like you should be working and it's 11 o'clock in the day and you can't really get anything done and just going for a walk and not beating yourself up, enjoying a vacation even if you feel guilty for not working. um, I think I think another word is when you become aware that an issue is or that something like the awareness piece that we were talking, meeting it with acceptance rather than just beating the shit out of yourself. Like just catching where you are in the moment or like, oh, this is a habit that I'm trying to get over rather than beating yourself up, meeting yourself with acceptance and like, it's okay. I caught myself. We don't do that anymore or whatever it is. Because just being aware isn't enough. Um, you know, I, when there's in basketball, there's always on every team, there's one guy who just is in the gym nonstop. And he's one of those guys when he works out, if he misses, he's freaking out and super hard on himself and knows what he's doing wrong. He's super aware. Oh, my thumb is getting in the way. Like I keep pushing. Why am I keep pushing? And he doesn't get any better. He's aware, but he's not getting better because he's not giving himself grace um, and accepting it and allowing to move on. So I don't know exactly what self love is, I guess, but I think just a combination of grace and acceptance and perspective.
My contention sometimes with the term self-love is I think it's been hijacked by a certain demographic that has turned self-love into something it shouldn't be or wasn't meant to be when it was originally created and conned. I think there's an element, I think most people, I don't like to generalize, but I'm going to. Most people use it as a reason to not get better and say, oh, this is just the way I am. I just have to accept, I'm going to nitpick a couple things. Oh, I just have to accept that I'm 100 pounds overweight, or I just have to accept that I have a short temper, or I just have to accept that I'm a selfish person, right? And just love myself for that. That's not what you're saying.
Right.
And then there's the other demographic of people who really need self-love and to give themselves grace and to put their foot on the brake and to rest and to recover and to understand, hey, you can't just sprint every second of every day. And so I always, anytime I have a guest mention self-love, you're certainly not the first and you won't be the last. I always like to hear what it means to them because I think it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
And I think again, going back to the awareness piece, you have to know what type of person you are. And so like for me, self-love, I kind of transitions like just self-honesty. I
Yeah.
need to have the awareness of when I need to, hey, you need to put your foot on the gas pedal, you need to suck it up and get going versus, okay, hey, you've done a lot. You need to give yourself some grace, take some time, go spend some time with family, right? And so for me, self love has become self honesty, is knowing what I need and when I need it and why, and
Yeah.
then doing it.
Yeah.
And so that is self love in my own definition.
Yeah. I think a lot of the coaches that I work with all need self-love. You know, it's such a hard position where you're getting constant feedback from wins and losses, from players not liking you or not pleasing all the players, to other people getting higher jobs and moving up quicker. That it's such a demanding job that the one thing that I think I really help people with is bringing perspective and just saying like, no, you are doing a good job in this, not fluff, um, you know, and not just like accepting being over 100 pounds overweight. You know, it's a lot of the time this work gets confused with like, just speaking in sports terms, um, like they think the mental work is very defensive and very like, um, there's a problem, we got to fix it, but it's way more offensive and strategies for you to be at your best. um, and so I think that's kind of where this world is and why people kind of are having trouble with it or opening up to it.
You talk about how the biggest problem in sports right now is not NIL or transfer portal, it's the lack of resources for coaches.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's right now our coaches are not set up for success. Everything is built around the student athlete experience, which is super important. You know, the student athletes come first, but there's nothing for the people that support them. And so we've all had coaches who were complete assholes, and that affects your student athlete experience. And so, and also, if just thinking about it, you know, players are at a program now for 1 to 2 years max. And so pouring into their mental well-being, or not well-being, but their mental performance, and then they're going to leave, you know, rather than equipping a coach who can deal with all different types of people. It's a better return of investment. Um, and also players, I know with the extra year for COVID, at max you could stay in college for like 6 years. We got coaches in here for 30, so like we got to take care of the people who are running this game. And I'm not saying student athletes' mental health isn't as important or their performance isn't. I'm saying this will help it even more, equipping these coaches.
I tend to find myself, and this is how I know I'm in the middle between like pro coach, pro player, or like pro organization, pro player, is because if you ask most players that I work with or speak to, they would say I'm pro coach, pro organization. If you asked coaches or organizations that I've spoken to or work with, they would tell me I'm more pro player. And so I find myself very much in the middle in terms of the give and take. I firmly agree that there's not enough resources for coaches.
Yeah.
They are asked to do an infinite number of things. In a lot of those ways, they were not qualified. They just happened to know the X's and O's of basketball or football or name your sport. And then is thrust upon them all this responsibility because they just happen to be really good at coaching. And so, where do we begin to provide the solutions for coaches for what they need?
I think just creating space for them. Um, Coaches are going 24/7. There's no such thing as an off season. When we made the NCAA tournament, we were behind in recruiting. We made it to the Final Four. We were behind in recruiting because everybody else could start bringing their kids on campus. And so as soon as we lost, we were bringing kids on campus. So there's no space. I think the structure of it all is messed up, and then just space to talk to somebody confidentially. Um, right now, coaches can't go to an admin um, because they don't trust them. It's hard to go to a boss who can fire you and say, "I'm really struggling with my like thinking I can lead this group." I don't know if I can do it, or the different fears. You can't go to your admin for that. As a head coach, you can't really go to your assistants for that because you want to portray confidence, and so there's nowhere to turn, and they turn to spouses, which are already sacrificing enough. So I believe just creating the space for coaches from changing up like everything. The off season is harder than the regular season sometimes, especially in today's day and age. And I don't think it's a check in the box thing. It's not bring all your coaches in and let's put a PowerPoint up. It's sitting down with your coaches, letting them process internally, externally, let them breathe for a second, and then create winning strategies to go out there and win.
So when you say create space for the coaches, could you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by creating space?
Yeah, I think every coach should have a coach. I think each school should have somebody on staff that the coaches can go to that's specifically for the coaches. Like you said, coaches have done their 10,000 hours in their individual sport, but they haven't done their 10,000 hours when a kid's parent passed away in a car crash, or when there's petty drama on their team, or when your assistant coaches aren't clashing, or when you're struggling to lead a kid who um, is dealing with trauma. Coaches get pulled in so many different ways, and they have decision overload. They're on an island, and so literally an hour to just talk with somebody of what's going on. I tried to go to therapy while I was coaching, and it was hard because the first 30 minutes I was explaining what a recruiting period is. It's and so you waste a lot of time, and they don't understand why you have to be on the phone at 5 o'clock and answer on a Friday night and answer a big time recruit, or how you don't have your own schedule and you can't just take a Saturday off. So really putting people to support these coaches and have someone in position that's only focused on the coaches.
So when you left college on medical leave due to your mental health challenges, how have you used that experience to now help coaches who may be going through something similar or on the path to heading to where you got?
So when I left college on medical leave, I was just a regular student. And I thought I was dying. This was before Instagram and the awareness of anxiety. I was having random panic attacks. I didn't know what was happening, so I thought I was dying. So went home, left school on medical leave, met with a therapist, got on some medication, really learned how powerful the brain was in that moment, and trained hard to get back. I was afraid to go into stores by myself. I was afraid to sleep in my own bed. I was afraid to be away from people. I was afraid I was going to have another panic attack, and I didn't know when it was coming. So I was in constant panic. Um, and so I did a bunch of different things to get back on track, and finally built the courage to go back to school. Small wins. I ate in the calves, just kept stacking days. Went to class. Um, and the biggest thing I learned from that was one, how helpful people actually are if you open up, and then two, how everybody's going through their own stuff. Um, and everybody would come to me. I became like the spokesperson for anxiety. And like, hey, I go through this too. Like, how did you do this? How did you do that? Um, and so I really started making my message, and it just started helping people, just being open about it. So it taught me about like how I don't need to bottle anything in. I can open it up. And I think another thing that really helped me was the perspective shift that it's like I'm allowed to have a problem. I was like I wasn't too blessed to have a problem. I had both parents. I was going to school for free. I had friends who weren't going to school, whose life was going in a different direction, and I didn't think I was like my life is going too well to have a problem. And that was the biggest um, shift that kind of changed everything around. I left, and my dad was like, "You're just gonna have to work at this like you do basketball, and put in the work, put in the reps, and you'll be back." As far as how's that helped me with other coaches, I think it helps me with other people because I don't judge people anymore, or I just have a better understanding for people. I know everybody's going through stuff. I don't take anything anybody does personal. Um, it's more of a reflection of what's going on with somebody else, and I just like to share my story. I know what it's like to sit in your head for all day and just ruminate and think about what's going to go wrong, or what if this, what if that. I know how taxing it is. I know how lonely that is. So when I came back, I just wanted to make a pact to make sure no one else goes through something alone. Um, and then that helped me tremendously as a coach. I was the locker room guy just because guys came to me, they could talk. They knew it wasn't about basketball with me, it was about them as people. And so that helped me tremendously as a coach. And it still helps me now help coaches because um, I know what it's like. I know what it's like to be in your head and not think you're working hard enough, and then um, want to do a good job, improve yourself, and move up the ladder. And then while you're doing all that, go against actual opponents. So um, I think it just gives me the empathy to work with people.
What did you determine was the root cause of the anxiety that you were having?
Man, I'm still trying to figure that out. I think I've done a lot of deep work. I've done some EMDR. I've done some different types of therapy. I think it was a spiral that I just wasn't catching, and it was just habits. I was leaning towards anxiety for out of habit. Like I was yeah, I was just turning to anxiety. One, I think it might have came from an area of not being heard as a child and wanting to be heard. And so my body would get physically sick and I would I would get attention then. So it might be that. It could have been a chemical imbalance. My family is also all anxious. I have bipolar in the family. I have family members who are very deep thinkers. So it's kind of passed down through blood, but I'm stopping it here, and really focusing on creating a life to when I have my own kids that we're passing down genes that will set them up to be successful.
What helped you the most overcome the severe anxiety that you had?
Um, Acceptance and understanding what anxiety is and why it's happening, um, and that it's a natural response of survival. Cavemen were anxious or else they would die. If a caveman almost got bitten by a snake, he's not just going to be super positive about it and just walk around like nothing happened. He would be on edge. Um, and so I think understanding that it's just in our blood. And yeah, I think that was a huge shift. And then also just it's okay to be anxious. Like, so what? You're anxious. It's a feeling. It's not the end of the world. Um, I think realizing that it's all a story and that you could rewrite your story helped me a lot too. If a lot of it was I'm not going to be this. I'm like, let's say this podcast, like, oh, this podcast is going to be terrible. Colin's going to hate me, never text me again, and this isn't going to go anywhere. Or this podcast is going to be amazing. I'm going to get a $2 million deal after this. The Giants are going to hire me to work with their coaches. I'm going to get an NBA deal. Like, neither one is true, but you could follow whichever one serves you. And so once I realized that I could flip the script my own, um, it's been game changing, I would say.
One of the hardest things I have found in working with athletes, more so in moments of loss, is teaching that acceptance piece that you don't have to like something, but you have to accept it. And fighting through that wall that you can't change isn't going to serve you. How did you get to the point where you became excellent at acceptance?
Um, Over time, I would say. I mean, I hate losing too. Don't get me wrong. But I'm also okay. What's next? Next play mentality. I think that is huge. I think I'm for efficiency and productivity, and sitting and just beating yourself up of being mad. I realize I doing that doesn't show that I care. Actually, moving on shows that I care, and I think a lot of athletes and even coaches just think that they have to be super pissed off and hold on to things to show that they care. Um, and I don't think that's necessarily true. I think moving on is actually more productive and will get you closer to what you want.
I love that perspective switch. It shows you care more to figure out what's next or the next step. I've never looked at it that way.
Yeah, I mean it's just like next play mentality. It's if you hit a bad golf shot and just sitting there being like, "Damn, I'm in the rough," like that was a terrible shot. This thing is over. Rather than just being like, "All right, let's go play from there." I heard something that in basketball, um, if a whole team bought into next play mentality, that would save themselves or that would spot themselves 10 points. And I couldn't agree more. It probably would do more. You know, Imagine if everybody on your football team was able to put the last play behind them, and that's the same with a loss. I want to take our learns from the loss. I don't ever want to lose again. But just sitting there beating yourself up um, isn't going to help you win the next game.
Now, I know you coached former or you've coached four NBA players.
Mhm.
Was that a talent, a skill advantage that they had, or did they have some of these qualities that you're talking about now that have helped them excel at the next level? Or did you have to teach them those things?
So I worked with all of them in high school. I was at a really good high school. But they definitely, I mean, they definitely were God gifted. Being 6'11" and being able to do whatever you want with a basketball helps, or being able to shoot from half court. But I think what they all had in common was they were super hungry to get better. Um, and they didn't dwell in their losses that much. Honestly, like our coach was a former pro. He brought in a bunch of pros and they would beat up our guys all summer. And our guys were delusional and like pissed off. Like what? Like I shouldn't be getting killed. But they kept coming and kept wanting to get better and then being a sponge. So I think what helped them was situation. They got a super um, found by somebody who didn't need them as players. They were in a situation where they were loved and cared about as people. They had all the resources and they were gifted as well.
You said that they would get beat and they would just keep coming back. I think that there's this balance that needs to happen with athletes, and they need to be challenged. They need to experience failure. They can't just win all the time because eventually they won't just win all the time, and they need to know how to respond to that. In that same breath, you can't overkill people with failure because it will knock them down to a place where it's too hard or they won't come back from it. Where have you found that balance in exposing guys to those challenges and failures to show, hey, there's levels to this game and
Yeah.
you can get here, but you need to see what here looks like?
Yeah, I think it's all about the culture that you create as a coach. If you have a culture that iron sharpens iron, um, and you let the guys compete, and that's the norm. And winning and losing comes from competing. It just happens. And you compete every day. They just get used to competing and used to those feelings. I think you also pull guys aside. Assistant coaches are super important to pull guys aside. I think you also empower the older guys and just be like, hey, you remember when you were a freshman, you know, homeboy over there is struggling a little bit. Why don't you go talk to him? Or what do you think he needs? And or telling them a story, but like, look, I know you hate where you're at right now, young puppy, but that guy that's killing you right now, he was in your shoes. Um, and consistent feedback of what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong, and that you're doing a good job is huge. But we're big components. I'm not shying away from competition. I think competition is super healthy. When I was at LMU, we had the number one team in the country. We were on a 32 game winning streak, and we had 11 guys that could go, and only six could play. 6 to 7 we played, and we let guys go after it. There was winners and losers, but as soon as it's over, it was everybody touch up. We're a big family, so I really think it's the environment that you create. Just beating the heck out of your second group isn't going to help. But I think another thing that I think is huge is just contact with individual players, see what's going on in their mind. You notice a guy who's getting frustrated or beat up or discouraged, pull him aside, ask him what's going on, um, and just get a lot from a conversation.
Can you challenge coaches in this way? Similar to how you challenge these young guys in practice, how do you challenge a coach to give them a level of competition or challenge that they may need?
Yeah, I've had coaches who struggled late game, and they weren't doing much situational stuff in practice. So you put them through different situations, down five, up two. So being used to different situations. A lot of the time, coaches struggle with trust and delegating. So let one of your assistants run a drill and see what happens. See if like you guys survive the practice. Let's post game. Let's see what it's like not sitting in the shower and just acting like the world's coming to an end. Let's take a breath before we dive into film. So for coaches, it's more like off the court stuff. Setting routines, post practice routines, bedtime routines, morning routines, as well as flip the switch. As far as the coaching thing, I think, every time you put your hand on a door before you walk into film, if you check in with yourself, like, who am I walking into this room? I think helps a lot and checks coaches. Um, Watching yourself on film, because the players do for sure. You know, Coaches with bad body language, like that shows up in film. And when a player goes back and watches a game, they're watching your body language too, especially in basketball, because the camera shows it all.
What are some of your favorite success stories that you've had helping coaches?
Yeah, I think one would be I came with each situation is so unique, but I came with a softball coach who this was like her 13th year coaching. Every year in the game, she felt more and more stress. Um, and she felt less and less qualified. Um, and her team was below 500. They were midway through the year, and they were panicking late game. And we got really deep, and it turns out she was panicking late game, and it was bleeding onto her players. And so we met every week and put some things in place of because in fall ball she was elite. She was super confident. Everything was really good, and she was coaching out of a place of love and calm there. And then when the season came, she was very focused on fear of losing and messing up and things falling apart, which is very easy as a head coach to spiral. So we set a time, an hour a week for her. She started going to yoga. She started dancing on the third baseline. She started empowering her players because the best teams coach themselves. And she shifted a lot of weight that she had on herself to the players, empowering the players, not just stating the obvious of we need to do this, we need to do that. It's what do you guys think we need to do? How can we be better at playing on the road? Empowering them, asking questions to help them have the answers, rather than trying to figure out a pitcher and why she's doing bad. Ask the pitcher what's going on and how she can help. And that shifted a lot of weight that she was carrying. They ended up making the NCAA tournament. They went on like a 20-game win streak, made the NCAA tournament. And then the year after, um, they were the fastest team to 30 wins. And she actually got to a point where she wasn't used to winning and what comes with winning. Because winning, you have to fight human nature a lot more than you think. Complacency, jealousy, you get everybody's best shot. There's fears when you're winning. I was at a school where I didn't lose a home game for 4 years. There's a lot of fear when you win that much. And then I think another one would be I had a young coach who was going through imposter syndrome, a golf coach, and took over for a legend that he worked for, and it was kind of that legend's baby that he was taking on, and he didn't want to mess it up. He also felt like he needed to prove himself. He was moving over a chair, and he wanted to create separation between him and his players. He moved from the relationship coach to the guy making the decisions. He was completely overwhelmed, And so just breaking down his focus and prioritizing, what his job is, which he came up with is just to do what's best for the team and put us in position to win, as well as produce men and pros. And just shifting to that focus every day took so much pressure off of him. He had two All Americans that were clashing. One was a like a Kobe, I'm gonna outwork everybody, and the other was kind of just I'm gonna show up, and they were clashing. And he sided with one of them more than the other, but he didn't know how to handle it. And so we created a discussion to um, get these guys on the same page, and it was just like two simple questions of what do you guys want this year, and what would get in the way. And that led to tears and them really opening up and really empowering the players. And he ended up making the NCAA tournament for both the women and the men's golf team, which is very hard to do. And then his men's team went all the way to match play, and he was national coach of the year, so or candidate. So he went from imposter syndrome to one of the best coaches in the country.
How many of the coaches that you work with actually acknowledge the joy that they have from coaching?
None. When they start, the focus is what's going wrong, how pulled left and right they are, um, what could go wrong, trying to get in front of fires. You know, it's such a complex job where you wake up, you think about 30 other people before yourself. You're trying to practice plan, and then you got a kid getting kicked out of the English department for cheating on a test. You got the donor who wants to just go look at the locker room. You're just getting pulled in so many different directions, and you're exhausted. Um, and so people are focused on winning and keeping their jobs. Um,
I asked the question to Clint Hurdle, former Pittsburgh Pirates manager. He currently is a bench coach. I believe he's the bench coach for the Colorado Rockies. But I asked him on his time in Pittsburgh, I was like, did you appreciate everything that you did? The Pittsburgh Pirates have had three winning seasons over the last 25 years. I think three winning seasons, maybe four, but they've made the playoffs three times under his tutelage. And he was like, Colin, he's like, in those moments, no. He was like, I did not appreciate it. He's like, I never took time to reflect, to understand what we were doing. He was like, when you're in those moments, you are just focused on one thing, and that's to try and win.
yeah,
He's like, but as I left and, as I reflect and I run into Pittsburgh people and they tell me, how much or how important those teams were to them, he's like, I get the chance to appreciate it now. He's like, but in those moments, I don't. And
yeah,
it just such a powerful thing that sticks out to me is there's all the coaches, all the teams in the world, probably less than 1% actually in the moment are joyful for their experiences.
it's kind of why I started what I was doing, what I am doing, because coaches are heroes. Coaches impact so many people's lives, and coaches are dreamers too. Like the coaches are living their dreams every day. They're wearing sweats to work. They're being around a bunch of like kids who they can impact. They're getting paid to coach a sport they love, and to not enjoy that, I think is wrong. And I think you can do both. It just it might not be common, but you can make it happen.
You have mentioned in the past that SMART goals set people up for failure. Could you tell me why?
I think SMART goals are important, to have measurable goals, but every SMART goal that I've wanted to get, like people are so good at getting their SMART goals. I wanted to be a college coach. I wanted to win at the highest level there. I did. But I didn't work on the things that I thought were going to, that I thought I was going to feel. You know, if me and you climb a mountain and both of our goal is to get to the top, but you also set intention, you know, I'm going to get to the top and I'm going to soak in everything and really enjoy the experience. And mine is just to get to the top. Our experiences are going to be totally different. We're both going to get there. I'm going to be hungry halfway through, complaining like, man, my legs are tired. How much more we got? While you're sitting there like, man, this breeze feels nice. I'm gonna stop and get a snack. And so you just setting intention creates an experience that I didn't have. And we are so good at getting our goals. And I feel just like smart goals. Once you get there, you expected it. So it's like, yeah, you should have got there. You set your mind to it. If you didn't get there, you shame yourself. And there's not really like once you get there, that's why there's like a huge rate. I don't know the number. I'm not even gonna make it up, but just the amount of depression that comes after coaches who win championships. It's because they did everything and they got there, and it's now what So I think you have to be super. If I had to do it all over again from the beginning, I would want to be a college basketball coach while being a good, like, set intention. I want to experience peace, joy, and fulfillment while setting boundaries and helping people reach their dreams, and keeping it very broad, but also you could accomplish so much through that.
I love the living with intention and adding intentionality and those measuring sticks and milestones that are outside just the wins and loss column. Because I do believe that is what sports and life is all about, experiencing those moments, good and bad, allowing yourself to experience the full range of emotions that a human can have. We think that emotions are bugs, but in reality, they're features, right? They're there to serve a purpose. They're there to tell you things, both good or bad. And I'm also not a big believer in labeling things as good or bad.
Yeah,
Like they just are.
yeah,
And then we do get to choose, or we get the choice to assign them meaning, right? We experience this. Okay, understand that, give it meaning, and understand how that can serve you. And there's been a lot of goodness today. That intentionality piece and choosing, that analogy, I just think was one of the more powerful things that we've discussed today.
yeah, yeah. I think it's we're so good at putting our head down and going to get it, but then we lose track of what matters to us. And then that creates out of alignment, and that creates frustration and emotions that we're not comfortable with, and can lead to you leaving a profession or not being good in your profession.
Well, hey, I appreciate you, my friend, coming on today. Um, Cooper, if there's anything that you're working on, anything that you want to promote, or if people want to reach out to you, please take the next, couple minutes to tell us what's going on.
Yeah. So I'm still looking for coaches to work with this year. I got a few more spots left. So I help coaches master the areas outside the X's and O's that impact winning. And it's been game changer for so many coaches. And you can go to my website at cooperneiman.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at coachcoop.com. And I also have a former coaches connect group for former college coaches who got out the game and trying to figure out life. Coaching is a fraternity, and when you leave the profession, the phone stops ringing. It's a very confusing time, to try to find your value and what's next. And I created a base and a village for those people. When you get out of coaching, we got salespeople, we got teachers, we got um, everything, and we can connect you with whoever you need to talk to, and just continue the fraternity. When you leave coaching in college, you shouldn't leave the fraternity. And then you guys can email me at coachcoop@cooperneiman.com or text me at 301-802-9654. My passion is coaches. They were the most important people in my life. And the work that coaches do, they could use a little support too.
I appreciate you, brother. Thank you for coming on, listeners. Thank you for tuning in. Tune in next week. Download the pod. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check us out at athleticfortitude.com. 5 stars only, baby. See you guys next week. Thanks, man.
All right, man.